How's everybody doing? Well, everyone must have forgot that tonight was test night.
I forgot there's so much snow.
We're almost there. Do what? So everybody study up.
Snow day.
It's snow day. Let me get my notes here.
Maybe you should give us all the answers. Your prayers were.
I prayed for over a foot.
We don't always get what we want.
That's true. We got some, so that was good. I didn't get what I needed. No, I needed more. Yeah, I should have. All right, we are in Esther chapter 9. Almost done. Get there here. All right, so we got down to, I think we got down to verse 18, didn't we? Do we have any notes? 23? Okay. Oh, yeah, that's true. They accepted it. All right, so we'll start in verse 24. So looking at the Feast of Purim and how Mordecai had sent out a decree basically set in law that this would continue to be a feast. What were they going to do for the feast day? Do you remember what he stated? Yeah, give each other gifts of food, presents, whatever. You know, it's a celebration. So there's a feast. And so they're to celebrate on the 14th and the 15th day of the month. And so they would celebrate. And so then verse 24, it says, because, this is just the explanation of why they were doing this. This is in the middle of that. Verse 24 says, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and has cast Pur, that is Lot, to consume them and destroy them. So verse 24, we see the Jews, and they accepted that decree. But this is the second time. It's interesting. This is the second time that it's mentioned that he was a Agagite, or from that lineage. Now, it seems to be important that it's mentioned again. So, it was mentioned back when we introduced to Haman. Now it's brought up again. Remember, what was the significance of that, or possibly the significance of Agagite? So we have a Bible character named King Agag. There we go. Now, he was supposed to be, he was killed, and the Amalekites were all destroyed. And so, it was believed, according to Scripture, they were all wiped out. But this, people say, well, this is a lineage of his lineage. He was a descendant of King Agag, and so he was always an enemy of the Jews anyways. And so, but we don't know. But it's interesting it's mentioned again, twice. And so then verse 25 says, but when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot, which Haman had devised against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. And so just finishing up the commentary basically on what we've already studied. And so then verse 26, so they called these days Purim, after they are pure. Now remember, what does pure stand for? Stated in the text there. A lot. Yeah, a lot. To cast lots. So it's a lot. So that's what that word pure means. So the Feast of Purim is a pull from that, the Persian word that's used there. And so it means to cast lots. And so, interesting just to think about that. After the name pure. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter and what would happen to them, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants and all who would join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year according to the written instructions and according to this prescribed time, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, that the days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. So, a lot there. And looking at this celebration, I think I skipped over this. Go back a little bit. I have a quote here. It's from Matthew Henry in his commentary. It says, "What it has since degraded to, which is much worse." And this is talking about this feast. So it talked about how they were going to remember this feast from generation to generation for years and years. And so he states this: their own writers acknowledge that this feast is commonly celebrated among them with gluttony, drunkenness, and excessive riot. Their Talmud, and so if you remember what the Talmud is, it is their writings after the destruction of Jerusalem. So this is going to be after Christ's time, how this feast has been celebrated. The Talmud says expressly that it is the feast of Purim. A man should drink till he knows not the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordecai. See what the corrupt and wicked nature of man often brings, that which was at first well intended. Here is a religious feast turned into a carnival, a perfect revel, as wakes are among us. Nothing more purifies the heart and adorns religion than holy joy. Nothing more pollutes the heart and reproaches religion than carnal mirth and sensual pleasure. And so it turned into a terrible holiday, really, where they just drank and partied and got drunk, which is interesting because how this all started was from what? The same thing. Isn't that kind of ironic? And so that's what it turned into, unfortunately, in times in later on in years. And so this was to be kept and celebrated. We do not see where Christ celebrated this feast in the New Testament. We don't really have a reference to it. Remember we talked about there's really no reference to the book of Esther anywhere in Scripture. So there is no reference to this Feast of Purim. Now we know through Jewish history that they did celebrate this, and they still celebrate today. And so this feast is still continued, but we don't see Christ celebrating it during the New Testament.
But the other difference between a religious feast and a cultural feast.
Mm-hmm.
That's saying a lot of our traditions are more cultural than religious.
Yeah. There's a point where that some try to pull in to say that Christ celebrated it in one of the books of the New Testament or the Gospels, but there's no statement of it. It just says there was a feast, they celebrated it and went on. But yeah, you're right. It's more of a cultural celebration that started.
So were the Amalekites completely wiped out at that time?
It's supposed to have been. God told Saul to destroy them all, and he kept the king, and then,
Haman was the Amalekite, right?
well,
And his son?
some people believe he was. We don't know because of the use of the word, his descendant, that name that's there. Like, yeah, the Agagite, his lineage. They say it comes from the king's lineage, King Agag, that was killed by Samuel. So. Yep. Because God told Saul to go do that, and he killed everybody but the king and kept the king. And then when Samuel came along, he slaughtered him there.
Exodus 17, 14 maybe? It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the same.
Yep. And that was then done in the time of Saul.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's why I say there's a lot of people that think that that's just because of the relation of the name, but we're not told and we don't know. And according to Scripture, they're supposed to be all wiped out. So, But it's just interesting that he keeps bringing up that name. Where that name came from, we don't know. There's a possibility there. Just interesting. All right, so then we see that they keep this feast. So then verse 29. It says, so they call these days Purim. 29. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. There's really not a lot to discuss here, just stating what had happened after this case. They wrote these letters. There was a second letter that was sent out to make this feast day really a law for the Jews to follow. It's interesting, she and Mordecai had the authority to do this, where was Mordecai? What was his position? Second in command. So really, since the king was over him, the king could change or say no to what they did, but of course he didn't. And so the book, it stated that it was written down in the book. Well, that book, it's probably the book of the Persians, as we're going to see is talked about in the next chapter. In verse 2, the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Medes and Persia. It's probably that book that it was written down in. Some say it could have been written down in referring to Esther, and it was Mordecai who wrote the book of Esther. Remember, that was a possibility. So it could be. We just don't know. But it stated that it was written down, and so in the book. All right, any questions on chapter 9? Nothing? All right, let's go to the long chapter, 10. Now, like I said, if you're reading from the, hopefully you're not, but the Apocrypha, it has like at least 11 or 12 more verses in chapter 10. It's a lot more added commentary, which is not in the original, and it's not right. But these are the verses that we do have. And so, verse 1, it says, and the king Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land, on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. And so, first it starts out, Ahasuerus imposes a tribute on the land. Now, what is a tribute? It's a tax, is what it is. Thayer says it's a burden. It's a tax. And so he imposed a tax. Now I was thinking about taxes the other day, or yesterday. I was driving. You know, taxes have been going on forever. Every king, every kingdom, every nation has imposed taxes. And so that's what he did here. He imposes a tribute on the land and the islands. Now, the islands would refer to the areas along the Aegean Sea. So if you remember, he did go and capture, or try to capture Macedonia in that area, but he was not able to. But he did get all of this area of Asia. Then he went across the Hellespont and lost. But he captured a lot of these islands that are along the Aegean Sea. And so they were a part of the Medo-Persian Empire. And so that's what it's talking about with the isles of the sea there. And so he poses this tax. Why that's mentioned, it's just stated. I mean, it doesn't really go along with what we're talking about in the book of Esther, but it's stated that he imposed this tax. And then all of his acts are written down in this book, and the account of Mordecai, and which the king advanced him. And so we just kind of get a review of Mordecai's, really his greatness. Did he push to get this respect and to get this honor. No. And that's what we've talked about over and over again with Mordecai. He earned this because of his character. And, we see why Mordecai was respected and really feared and how Haman wanted it. So notice verse 3. It says, "For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitudes of brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all his countrymen." So two things. He sought the good of the people. Now, if you're reading the King James, I don't know what the ESV says, but it says wealth. Does the ESV say wealth there instead of good in verse 3?
King James says well.
Yeah. I don't know what the ESV says, but wealth there, that's really the word. He sought the wealth of his people. So good really sums it up too. But his main purpose in being in that position was to protect his people. Well, we've seen that throughout this book. He protected them by all this that happened with Esther, and then now writing these decrees. But he gained a lot of respect and fear of other people, not scared, but that reverence of the position he is in because of his character and how he's worked tirelessly to make sure that he protected his people. And so he worked to promote his people and represent them in his position. Then it says, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. So how was Haman treating people? Yeah, he wasn't speaking peace. So he was kind. He treated people fairly. He probably represented not only his people, but also the people that, the other people of the kingdom. And because of that, he was well respected. And his greatness was then written down in the book of the Medes and Persians to be read for years by other kings. And so just says a lot about him. We already know this, but this really gives us more review and detailed look at some of the reasons why he was respected. And so just interesting looking at Mordecai and the difference between him and Haman. Now, if you're reading the Bible chronologically, so if you ever try to do that, and I have a printout I can give you if you want if you want to read the Bible chronologically. So if you're reading this chronologically, you would have stopped in Ezra chapter 6 and read the book of Esther. And now that the book of Esther you've finished it, you go back to Ezra chapter 7. So the events of Esther happened between Ezra 6 and Ezra 7. So just kind of interesting to think about. So if you want to read it chronologically, go to the book of Esther, or Ezra, read till chapter 6, then read the book of Esther, and then go to 7. So it's kind of where it fits in there. All right, any questions or anything to add on the book of Esther? Hopefully it's been a good study. Nothing? All right, well, I have questions for you.
Why was Esther put in the Bible, do you think?
Well, for one, we know that they read this at the Feast of Purim for years. So it was their festival that the Jews then celebrated for many, many, many years. And so that's one way you could, the authenticity of the book is how well it was received by the Jews to be authentic. So we know that it's authentic in that sense. And then, of course, I think God's providential care in making sure that the book was included in what we have today. I didn't really dig too much into the authenticity, but that's one of the biggest evidences for this being an authentic book and being in a part of our Bible is how the Jews accepted it, how well they accepted it throughout the years.
It shows how he preserved the lineage of Christ.
Yeah, it does, for 100%.
Yeah.
So,
Book of Esther in the Septuagint.
yes.
So she's used the Septuagint.
Mm-hmm.
So that shows the inspiration. He wouldn't have used a version that had book of
So it's not just a story of
Yeah.
love and intrigue.
No. Nope. Right along with the Song of Solomon, right? Madison's going to read that for us.
I have a Bible that says not to read it out loud. It needs
Really? That's funny.
Best days.
It was great. All right, so I've got some questions. So, like I said, it's an open book. It's in your notes. Hopefully, they're not difficult. I've got verses for most of the questions. A few of them are come from the introduction. But when was the book written, believed to be written? Anybody remember? It's not in your Bible, so it's going to be in your notes. So if you don't have your introduction notes, then you're probably not. These few questions are from the introduction. So 485.
4, 6, and 7.
There you go. That's a good way to put it. That's a good answer.
Mine says the book covers a 10-year portion, 483 to 473 BC, of the reign of Xerxes the first, 486 to 465 BC.
Yep. So in that time frame, so 485 to 465 is kind of where it fits.
My introduction.
There you go. What empire was in control during the time of Esther?
The Persian.
Yes, the Medo-Persian, right? So you could say Persia. What was the other name for Ahasuerus? I just said it. What was the capital that Esther and Mordecai were in? Shushan, that's right. What was Esther's Hebrew name? Yes. Kind of. It's a little different, but it starts with an H. Hadassah. Hadassah. So chapter 2, verse 7 gives you that, her Hebrew name. Chapter 2 and verse 7. How many provinces were under the Medo-Persian Empire?
147.
There you go. I looked at she had it down. She reminded me last time and I forgot. And so chapter 1, verse 1 tells us that. How long was the feast, the first feast of chapter 1? No. 100 and something. Verse 4. 180 days. That's right. And so the second feast, if you remember, I don't have this question, but it was 7 days. Let's see. What did the king allow in the second feast? What did he change to allow? No. He did, yes. But before that, what did he change in law? No. There you go. Verse 8. Yes, to drink as much as they wanted at their pleasure. Yeah. Yep. What advice was given to the king in chapter 2? Remember, he was sorrowful, kind of down. Yep, to replace the queen. So to send out to the whole country to find all the virgins and bring them in and find a new queen. Who was Mordecai to Esther? Cousin, that's right. A lot of times we think it is her uncle, because it says in verse 5 and 6 that he was his uncle's daughter, so it would be her cousin. What did Mordecai request of Esther in chapter 2? Exactly, not to tell her nationality. So verse 10 and 11. Why did Haman hate Mordecai? Okay. Yeah, Mordecai was a good guy, and he wasn't. That's right. So he would not bow down or pay homage to him. So that worshiping. So that's chapter 3, verse 2, and then also verse 5 and 6. What day was to be the mass killing of the Jews? Yep. Close. Yep. Adair. Yep. Or Adar. So that's verse 7 of chapter 3. The 13th day of the 12th month, which was Adar.
11 months into the future.
Yes. How much did Haman pay the king for the Jews?
10,000.
Yep. 10,000 what? Yep, of silver. That's verse 9. What was the reaction of Haman and the king after the decree went out?
Of Haman?
And the king. Yeah, they're happy. They went and got drunk.
They were tight.
Yeah, they were tight. They were celebrating. That's the end of chapter 3, verse 15. What was the reaction of the people of the land?
They were confused.
Yeah, or perplexed, as the New King James says. They were confused of what was happening. What did Mordecai ask of Esther? On behalf of who? And? Which included? Herself and her family, right? And her people. That's verse 8 of chapter 4. What was Esther's reaction to Mordecai's request? Okay, that was her second reaction. What was her first reaction?
She said, he hasn't called me.
Yeah, so her first reaction was kind of really, well, he hasn't, if I do this, I'm going to die, possibly could die. And then when Mordecai told her that she was ready, she was called for a time like this, how would she know? She says, if I die, I die. So that was her second reaction. How many feasts did Esther prepare for the king? 2. Yep. So chapter 5, verse 4, chapter 6, verse 14. How did Haman react to being invited to Esther's feast? He was excited. What else did he do? Yeah, he bragged about it, right? To who? His wife, his family, friends, anybody would listen, exactly. So that's chapter 6, verse 12 to 13. What did his family, no, that's chapter 5, sorry. Who was selected to honor Mordecai? Haman, yep. Well, what was Haman's reaction to honoring Mordecai? Yeah, he did it, but he wasn't happy. He was devastated, right? If you look at chapter 6, verse 12 through 13, it says he was very sorrowful. He was lamenting. What did his family tell Haman after this event? Yeah. It said, you've tried, you would not prevail against Mordecai, basically. You've tried and not going to.
This Mordecai, before who you began to call is Jewish descent, you will not prevail.
Yep, verse 13. So then how did Haman react to Esther as exposing his plot? Gasp, yeah.
He tried to beg.
Yeah, he's begging, right? To the point where when the king came in, what did he see?
Unfit situation.
Yeah, he was laying on her couch, begging. Did not look good at all. And so what happened to Haman? Hung on his gallows. How was the new decree sent out by Mordecai different from the decree sent out by Haman?
Telling the Jews they could defend themselves.
Exactly. So the difference was what was Haman's decree?
To kill them all.
To attack, to be on the offense. The decree by Mordecai was that they were to defend themselves. That's chapter 8 and verse 11. How many people were killed when attacking the Jews, trying to attack the Jews? 75,000. Chapter 9, verse 16, which included who? Haman's 10 sons, right? And they got hung for an example. What was unique about how the Jews acted to being attacked, but they were allowed to do? What was unique about that? They didn't plunder. They were allowed to plunder, but they didn't. So they showed mercy, right? What was that feast then called? That was celebrated that day. Yep, Feast of Purim. And then what did Mordecai do different than Haman in his position? What was 2 major things that he did that we talked about?
To his people and spoke peace.
Yep, spoke peace to all those that he could. And so that's all I had. Simple, right? You guys knew all the answers. See?
I want a cahoots next time.
You want a cahoots? We can do that. I thought about doing that.
You should do what my teacher does.
What?
So we're sitting like this, and the 2 people go after, like against each other, who ask the question, whoever says it right, they move on, and if you get 7 in a row, they stop, and you keep going.
So I just randomly call people out.